Suffolk Pod Show is produced and managed by podtalk.co.uk. I'm Mark Mason.
And I'm Susanna Hornby.
Yeah, cooking and telling that story of net to plate and connecting the consumer with the producer, I think is the essence of what I do through storytelling, through visual and through narrative and through broadcasting.
Episode 22. Susanna talks to Mike Warner about our vibrant fishing communities and the importance of the UK fishing industry and a passion for seafood.
Welcome back to the Suffolk Pod Show and a very warm welcome to Mike. Hello.
Hello, Susanna. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Enjoying this beautiful freezing weather.
Yeah, no, it's proper winter weather now, isn't it? Which is, I'm a great advocate of winter weather. I think it's seasonal weather when it should be seasonal is ideal, and this dry and cold is lovely. To be honest.
It's beautiful. I love it, and the fresh, crisp air.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Mike, gosh, there's so much to talk about. We absolutely love your business. But I think really,
thank you.
It's a pleasure. Where we should start is basically you're just at one with the sea.
Yeah, I mean, I have been all my life, really, and it's interesting. It's come sort of full circle. I've always been involved in food production, if you like, but I started off my life as a boy, in Felixstowe, right by the coast, in Suffolk back in the 1960s and 70s, and really that I think they call it having salt water in your blood. My father was. Spent a lot of time on the sea and fishing, and that sort of instilled me this love of the sea and the coast and everything that swims in the sea as well. So, but it's all been in a very sort of commercial sense, really, as I've gone through my life, and I've always been at that sort of food production end in farming, and now more so back to fishing again.
What brought you back?
I think I'd done my time in agriculture, to be honest, and I'd been 30 years in farm management and consultancy, and I think it was just time to revisit what my calling, I suppose, and it's a bit of a destiny thing, I think, that all the trappings of my childhood, the going to sea and fishing my lobster pots and going crew for fish with a fisherman back in Felixstowe, all sort of came back to haunt me, and I just think that, I just wanted to devote the rest of my life to pursuing that, which I really, really enjoyed as a boy, and try and make a career out of it, which quite bizarrely and through a lot of circumstance and hard work has come about.
Yeah. Felixstowe, I didn't think would be a very prolific fishing area, but how wrong can I be?
Well, it always was. I mean, it's an inshore fishery, what we call a day boat fishery. So at Felixstowe Ferry, which is at the mouth of the River Deben, there's a very well established and old generational fishing community there still, and that's where I grew up. That was Felixstowe Ferry was my sort of playground, really. Yeah. And I went to sea from about age 10 or 11, I suppose, crewing for a local fisherman chap called Dougie Goodall, and long lining for cod and skate, and potting in the summer for crabs and lobsters. And of course, in those days there was no quota, fish were plentiful, and it was it was a great existence for a lot of. I mean, still a very, very hard life. I mean, fishing is a very dangerous occupation, even now with all the technology and modern safety and survival aids, but. Yeah, there's a lot of heritage involved, and Felixstowe is that archetypal sort of East Coast fishing community where tide and time really are the only things that change, apart from fish stocks, of course, which seem to have got less over the years. But that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to bring back seafood to the forefront of a nation who's lost the art of trying to deal with it.
I mean, I was about to ask you, obviously we don't have as much fish as we did, even in the 60s and 70s. What are we doing about sustaining the fishing industry over there?
Yeah, I mean, it's the inshore fishery, which I tend to focus on, is obviously the most sustainable, because these guys and what we call under 10 metre boats, inshore day boats, they are limited by the weather conditions and the tide a lot of the time. So, they only get to sea when it's good to go and the fishing conditions are right. And so it's self-sustaining, really, because so long as the fishermen are there and there is a product for them to catch, which is often very seasonal for the inshore fisheries, then, that's a very sustainable way of actually catching, very low impact on the environment as well. Yeah. You go to the bigger sector, to where the trawlers operate out of Peterhead and Newlyn, of course, you're dealing with much bigger volumes. And of course, that has to be managed on a quota basis, so that stocks are conserved for future years and generations.
What constitutes inshore fishing as opposed to trawler fishing? What's the difference?
Inshore fishing can be trawled. So you do have inshore boats which have little trawls, and it's exactly the same principle as the bigger boats. They tow a net along the seabed. It's for much shorter time. It's what we call short tows. So they might tow for, 40 minutes to an hour, something like that.
Yeah.
And of course, the fish doesn't spend so much time in the net, hence better quality. But really, an inshore fishery would be defined as a fishery that operates from a community and doesn't really go much more than 6 or possibly even 12 miles away from the shore, and return to that port within 24 hours or 48 hours sometimes to land their catch. And that's where the quality comes. It's absolutely pristine.
I can imagine. I mean, it really is super, super fresh. And that's where you use your expression from net to plate. And you love cooking.
I do, absolutely. I've loved eating seafood and cooking seafood all my life.
Yeah.
So it's a great way of, now I've come sort of full circle and immersed myself in the fishing industry for the last sort of 7 or 8 years, and been cooking and doing demonstrations. I do a lot of food. Well, I was doing a lot of food festivals until the current climate manifested itself. But yeah, cooking and telling that story of net to plate and connecting the consumer with the producer, I think is the essence of what I do, through storytelling, through visual and through narrative and through broadcasting as well. So we've just started last year. We made a little film about herring on the East Coast, and I'd like to do a lot more of that. But now, of course, with the coronavirus pandemic and restrictions on everyday life and lockdown, of course, that's brought me to another sort of level of seafood storytelling, which is actually selling the product as well. So I'm now buying these wonderful fish from day boats all around the UK, and selling them wholesale into London and to independent fishmongers, restaurants when they were open, and then our own little retail side as well at near Woodbridge at Grange Farm, Haskerton, where we obviously got our little fishy pop-up on a Friday, which is seems to be doing quite well.
And that's still open.
Oh yes, yeah, very much so. Yeah, so it's a lovely way of actually going to buy your food, because you've got on site there, you've got obviously the farm shop itself, and then there's a little cafe, and people can sort of wander about outside in the fresh air, and then come and see me and buy whatever the boats have landed that week.
I mentioned cooking there. I'm going to ask you later for a couple of recipes, but what influenced you on the cooking side of things?
My parents always, cooked a lot of fish when I was a child, so we had access to very fresh fish, seasonal as well. So obviously, father was great friends with some of the fishing community, and he'd go fishing himself. So we always had a regular supply of things like cod and whiting and skate, and we used to eat a lot of smoked fish, so smoked haddock and kippers for lunch at a weekend. For breakfast at the weekend. And father would go lobstering as well, and he'd go with he'd even go down to the rocks at low tide, low spring tide, with a stick and hunt about for crabs and lobsters. And of course, that was as a boy of about 5 or 6 years old, that was idyllic, scrambling about in the rock pools, coming back with a prize such as a lobster. So that's really, I've experienced this whole seafood thing throughout my life, and that continued. And then as soon as I started seeing things like the great Keith Floyd suddenly appear on television and start sort of embodying this passion for seafood in the way that he did, well, not just seafood, but particularly fish and shellfish for me, I just thought, wow, this is great, cooking on the deck of a trawler. And then, of course, Rick Stein and all the other celebrity seafood chefs followed. And I was entranced by it, and decided to replicate a lot of that cooking at home. And then, of course, when I had the opportunity to start writing about it, and I started my blog, A Passion for Seafood, I thought, well, gosh, there's an opportunity here, to combine all these elements of what I've been doing with seafood all my life, and to tell my own story, and to do my own promotion, which is where we are now.
Everyone must go to your blog. It's absolutely fabulous. Who takes your photographs of the food? I mean, I look at those. I could look at those for hours.
No, that's me. Yeah. No, it's just all about having a very good iPhone with a nice camera, and they don't always work out, but I've got, a bank of something like 40,000 photos on my Mac, which of the fishing industry and seafood. So there's plenty to draw on, and lots more coming on all the while. But it's that visual element is really important.
Can we look at the fishing industry around the whole of Great Britain? Because you are a bit of a master at it, and I know you travel around, but how has it changed, and what do we need to be particularly careful of to protect that wonderful industry?
Well, I think, overfishing is a bit of a buzzword, has been for a long time, hasn't it? And species like North Sea cod, were under threat from overfishing back in the 80s and 90s. The Scottish fisheries up in Peterhead and Fraserburgh, the Scottish sector had a thing called the Cod Recovery Programme for several years, and stocks started to rebuild, really, really well. So, I think there's a lot more emphasis on conservation management and fisheries now. But from a consumer point of view, we suffer in this country from something that I call the Great British Seafood Paradox, because we actually import sort of 70 to 80% of what we consume. So seafood has been very commoditized over the years, mainly by the supermarket trade. So tuna, salmon, prawns, haddock, cod, those sort of what I call the infamous five, which is mostly exclusively imported. And then bizarrely, of course, we export 80% of what we catch and goes to, well, as far as China, crab and lobster go out to the Far East, and then of course the European countries take a lot of what we catch in terms of whitefish and oily fish. And it always strikes me as being really weird that we're a collection of island nations with some of the most diverse and sustainable fisheries in the Northern Hemisphere, and yet we import all this seafood from abroad. I think from a consumer point of view, what we need to do is embrace our native species, and on some fish markets down in Cornwall and Brixham, places like that, there can be 30 to 40 species of fish, commercial fish and shellfish landed on a single market. So we need to look at alternatives. So eat seasonally. If cod is perhaps, there are pressure on stocks or any other fish, start looking for alternatives, eat whiting. We've got heaps of whiting off the coast here in Suffolk, wonderful fish. Just perfect for fish pies and for little, or for putting in batter or just grilling, and things like herring as well. With masses of herring in the North Sea. Again, a species which was overfished almost to commercial extinction back in the post-war years.
Really?
Following a herring ban in the North Sea in the 1970s, we started to see stocks recover again, but of course a generation missed out on the art of eating herring. And so nobody really, apart from a few roll mops and kippers, of course, nobody really eats herring in this country anymore. And it's such a shame, because it's the ultimate superfood, really, and we get loads here on the East Coast.
Yeah, we need to bring it back. How do we do that? How do we trigger the mechanism to get us to eat more like that?
That is the trick, Susanna. It's I think if you look across the water to our Dutch and Belgian and French and Spanish neighbours, they eat a lot more seafood as consumers than we do, probably to the tune of 15 to 20 kilos per head per year. And if we look at their eating habits, the Scandinavians eat a lot of herring, the Dutch eat a lot of herring, and that's where we export to. So we've got to look at their eating habits and their eating styles and try and bring that back. But bizarrely, this year, or the last 10 or 12 months since the first lockdown, we've suddenly seen that paradigm shifting. And people starting to embrace British fish and shellfish at a local level, because our independent fishmongers have suddenly seen a massive resurgence in trade. And whereas people were perhaps going to a supermarket or buying imported farmed fish like bass or tilapia or some of these more exotic farm species, they're now going to their independent local fishmonger, if they're lucky enough to have one, and asking for wild bass and for wild species and native lobsters rather than American, Maine lobster. And we're starting to see that turn, and it's very, very encouraging. It's a bit of a difficult way to affect that change, under the regime we've got at the moment with the restrictions, but it just shows what can be done. And I hope that, in the future, when we're back to some sort of degree of normality, that change in eating habit and style will carry on, and we can look at even more of our own home production.
I am a massive fan of kippers. I used to live up north, and we used to get on the train for a treat. We used to go and eat in the dining car, and for mornings they served obviously the full whatever, but always kippers on British Rail, always, and I loved them. But as a child, I loved them, and children love them because they're so tasty and interesting to look at.
They are very tasty, and of course kippers vary A true kipper connoisseur will know exactly where the kippers have come from, whether they've come from Craster up north, or they've come from Fortunes in Whitby, or Loch Fyne, or the East Coast here in Lowestoft, where our kippers are from. And of course the smokes vary, but at the end of the day, they're all herring. They're all split herring, cured and then smoked. And they are delicious. I think the trouble is people think of herring, they think, oh, it's bones, and they instantly sort of get put off. But actually, some of those bones in a herring are so fine and so fibrous. A lot of them cook down to a very sort of soft consistency, and really, once you've taken the backbone out and the rib cage of the fish, you've got a wonderful, wonderful flesh there, either as a fresh herring or as a kipper, a bloater. All these different ways of actually preparing them.
You say you sell locally, obviously, but you do, like you've just mentioned, you sell in London. Do you have a pop-up shop in London, or did I get that wrong?
No, it's just wholesale into London.
Right,
so
okay.
I started back last March. I started buying off our local boats here at Felixstowe Ferry just when the bass season started on April the 1st. The local market at Lowestoft had closed and furloughed its staff, and of course our fishermen needed a route to market, so I started buying, and then that grew and grew and grew. So we then started buying from boats around in other parts of the UK, and that continues. So at the moment we're catching bass down in Weymouth at the moment. Off Portland Bill, and there's a couple of boats who are supplying me down there, and I will drive down to Weymouth once a week, pick up a load of bass, and then we deliver it into London to fishmongers on the way back.
Wow.
But also crabs, lobsters, and other things that they want. So that's what we're doing in London. But also, I've got a lot of ties with restaurants. I've worked with a lot of chefs, certainly over the last few years, in terms of the consultancy work that I've been doing with British Seafood. And so we've got a lot of contacts, and when the restaurants finally come back online, we'll start selling to them, and in East Anglia as well. So a lot of local guys here that we're Justin Sharp, who I think has been on your pod show. Yeah, so Justin's one of our customers. Has a lot of our lovely dayboat fish and shellfish. Yeah,
that's right. I mean, he owns the Pea Porridge in Bury St Edmunds, and
that's right.
Beautiful food, beautiful fish. And now we know why. I wanted to ask you before, actually, and should have done, but how has Brexit now affected our fishing industry?
That's a really interesting one, and it's quite a thorny subject at the moment, because it would appear that having voted to leave the EU, mainly because of the way the common fisheries policy has operated, so a lot of people would say against our fishing industry in the UK for many years. Most fishermen wanted to get out and leave that and regain our territorial waters, and also have more access to fish therein. But of course, the export industry that we've built up on the back of our catches is incredibly important, to our economy. And now, of course, we're seeing the effects of having Brexit immediately play out, restrictions and administrative problems in getting that fish abroad.
Right.
And a lot of our processors are under pressure at the moment, purely because of the change in admin and paperwork and what it takes to get that fish overseas. We haven't got the market in the UK to sustain that sort of production, so it has to go into the export market that we've built up. But of course there are barriers to that at the moment. It's getting better. Talking to some of the producers, it is starting to improve, but there's been a massive hiatus in the short term in getting that product abroad. Not affected me, because I'm selling our British catch in the UK, and you'll find going around the country that there's a lot of people who are now in a much better position to sell that product, because we've got access to it where before it was getting exported. Having said that, on the flip side, of course, a lot of fishermen are now perhaps reluctant to go to sea and catch fish which was normally destined for export with an uncertain market. But it's got to even itself out.
Yeah, well, I mean, will that cause an unbalance in our seas, in our fish stock?
No, I don't think it will, because at the moment we've got a 5-year transition with continued EU access to our waters. The EU boats will continue to fish right up to our 6-mile limit until such time as we renegotiate that. And we allegedly will have a quota uplift of some sort. But I see it remains to be seen how that will actually improve the fisherman's lot, if you know what I mean.
Yeah,
it's a case of them, I think, having been firmly and squarely been sold a red herring second time around.
Let's just talk about Suffolk briefly on the back of that. How important is our fishing industry to Suffolk itself?
Well, it's a small part of our our coastal economy, really. I mean, from Felixstowe right round to Lowestoft, all along our coast. It's a small industry, but it's incredibly important.
Yeah.
In terms of heritage and tourism. I mean, you only have to look at Aldborough and the fishing boats on the beach there, and what they generate to the local economy in terms of tourist value. A good example of this is Hastings down in Sussex, where they have a similar beach launch fleet of about 25 boats. And talking to one of the fishermen down there last year, he was saying that fleet of boats at Hastings is worth something like 5 million to the local economy without even putting to sea. And that's in terms of what it brings, in terms of tourism and people wandering on the beach and eating local food. And do you know what I mean? It's a very important part of local culture. And of course, there aren't the youngsters coming into the fishing industry, especially in Suffolk. And once that line of succession is broken and a skipper retires and there's nobody to take over his boat or his license, then of course, that's gone and never to be replaced. And with it, the experience and the knowledge of the seasons and the local ground, and all these things that have taken generations to build up, are suddenly gone forever. And that's what I strive to try and protect, is that heritage of our fishing industry on the East Coast, and getting people to buy more local produce. Unfortunately, on the East Coast, we suffer from what we call a bit of opportunity starvation, which means the number of species we can catch commercially is relatively very few compared to down in Cornwall, for example, where they perhaps have 30 or 40 species to have a go at during the year. Here we have perhaps 5 or 6 main species, which is obviously limits the fisherman's ability to gain an income.
As a county and then as a nation, I'm just saying, is eat more local fish, be aware of it, because we don't want to lose it.
No, we don't. And I think that the trouble is with consumers in the UK, they do like seafood. They're a bit reticent to try and prepare it or cook it themselves. But it's the fishing industry seems to be a little bit forgotten. People love to go to harbours and coastal towns and villages on holiday, but there's very little connection between those people and what happens over the horizon. Yeah. You see the fishing boats come and go, but there's very little knowledge of what it takes to bring that seafood to our table.
It's a natural thing for our country. Surely we're an island. We've lived off our fishing industry forever.
Well, we have, and fish generally in the country, going back, hundreds of years, was a poor man's food. Oysters, for example. There was an oyster stall on every street corner in East London. Now, where are oysters? They're more of a delicacy now. Yeah. And the same thing with a lot of other species. Also, it was a staple, a protein staple, if you like, and very healthy. And that's really why I'm talking about herring at the moment. For a very healthy superfood type fish, it's incredibly affordable. And if only people knew that and we could create more of a demand, then the fishermen would be prepared to go and catch it. At the moment, if they catch herring, it's worthless, so they won't land it.
But as you say, it's a superfood. You can eat it raw, you can cook it, you can turn it into kippers. It's such a versatile fish.
It's wild protein. It's full of omega-3, vitamin B12, vitamin D, all these sort of micronutrients and minerals, which are the building blocks of a healthy lifestyle. Yeah. And people talk about fruit and vegetables and kale and veganuary and all these sorts of things. It comes down to a food which is wild and sustainable with no artificial inputs. Seafood's your thing.
Yeah. Right. We need to know how to cook it now. So could you very kindly give us one of your favourite recipes with a very local fish?
Let's go back down to Felixstowe Ferry and talk about the herring again, because, if you can get access to herring, and they are in season with us from sort of October through to December, that's when they're at their best and full of oil, and they've got full of roe, and the vast shoals come inshore. So less is more with seafood always. And I would say with a herring, just gutted and scored with a sharp knife either side, and perhaps just dredged in a bit of flour, seasoned flour, and then simply pan fried, or leave the flour off and just put under a hot grill, or bake in the oven. I've got a recipe on my website for baked herring, skewered, or with the head and the tail pinned with a cocktail stick, and then with a bit of fresh lemon and some grilled tomatoes. And, minutes, really, 15 minutes in the oven. You've got this wonderful fish that falls off the bone, a bit of fresh sourdough bread and homemade mayonnaise, and you've got this incredible, sustaining, hearty meal which has cost you pence.
Yeah, you've made me really hungry now. And look,
And there's lots more like it. There's lots more like it.
And what about seafood? I mean, lobster, for example. I look at a lobster and I wouldn't know where to start.
Well, lobsters, yeah, I mean, they're, again, people like yourself, they'll look at a lobster and go, oh my God, how are we going to actually deal with this? But again, it's very, very simple. And I think the best thing to do is for people to talk to a fishmonger and either to get the lobster cooked and dressed for them. It's very, very simple. It's just a case of steaming or spitting and grilling on a barbecue. That's a great thing to do in the summer.
Oh, yeah.
I think people are a bit reticent about dispatching a lobster also, and there are humane ways and means of doing that. We often put the lobsters into a cold environment like a freezer. That brings their core temperature right down before we actually dispatch them. But if you know what to do, and it's a very simple process, you can dispatch them very quickly and cleanly, and then they take very little time to cook. But delicious, absolutely delicious. Yeah, probably my favourite.
But
they're beautiful creatures.
Yeah, they are. They're stunning. And then let's talk about one last thing about something more unusual that people quite often would say, oh no, which would be something like eel.
Yeah, well, eel is one of those species which is not very sustainable.
Right.
The wild eel populations have suffered terribly.
Right.
Because this is another story in itself, but obviously wild eels are a migratory species. They start life in the Sargasso Sea, off the coast of Bermuda, and they make that journey all the way to our rivers on the west and southern coast of the UK. A lot of barriers to the eels getting upstream to where they need to grow on in lakes and ponds and rivers. And so eel is one of those species which, unless it's ranched and grown on in an artificial environment, wild eel is probably something which I would really avoid,
right?
Just because of its the pressure on stocks.
Interesting. What's in season right now?
So in season right now, we're just coming to the end of the bass season. So as I said earlier on, we're just making use of the last 2 weeks of the wild bass season, and they are a stunning fish at the moment. The ones we're catching down in Dorset, anything between 1 and 4 kilos in weight. And they're absolutely immaculate and a great fish to be eating right now. Of course, it comes to the end of January, and then we stop fishing for bass for a couple of months to let the things spawn, which is great, obviously, because it means that we actually are addressing measures to conserve stocks.
Yep.
What else is in season? I mean, we get some lovely line caught and netted pollock up from Cornwall at the moment. That's a great whitefish alternative to cod. Whiting as well. And then we've got our Scottish shellfish, which are getting some lovely Isle of Skye cockles down at the moment.
Oh, cockles. I forgot about cockles. Love them.
Yeah, these are beautiful. These are really large, which are great for steaming in a vongole or a bit of pasta with some garlic and white wine. Come the spring, March and April time, we'll see the return of Cromer crabs from Norfolk.
Yeah.
And that's a lovely seasonal shellfish to get stuck into.
Wonderful. So living in Suffolk, we're talking all about Suffolk itself. What can we buy locally that will support our local fishing industry?
Right. Okay. Well, there's one species which really stands out. We've got a lot of, and we're very lucky because it is abundant, but we don't enough of it or catch enough of it. And that's skate or thornback ray is the species we've got here. Ray wings or skate wings are very, very delicious. They're very affordable, and our fishermen catch them all the way up the coast. And that's one of our mainstay species, which we can pretty much catch all year round.
Yeah.
We don't seem to have the cod anymore. Dover soles we get a lot of in the summer months and through the autumn. Yeah. But skate, I think that's one that people ought to focus on. Very easy to cook. Just pan fry a skate wing in a bit of foaming butter in a sort of beurre noisette. Yeah. Until the meat just falls off the bone and serve with whatever you like, some sauté potatoes or something.
Delicious. And it's a white fish, is it? That sort of
It's a white fish, yeah. And you can also take the meat off the bone, and I've made them into fish cakes with mashed potato and paprika, and that's another little recipe on my website. So
they're great. Look. Mike, thank you so much for talking to us. Really,
you're welcome.
So interesting. Now, can you give us your website address, please.
Yes, of course. Yeah, so it's www.apassionforseafood.com. And you can also find me on Twitter at A Passion for Seafood and on Instagram at A Passion for Seafood.
Super. Thank you. And if anyone wants to get in touch with you about any of that and more, just get in touch with you.
Please do. Yeah, I'm always open to answering questions about the industry, about cooking seafood, giving talks and things like that when we're allowed to. So, I'm more than happy to engage with anybody.
Lovely. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Susanna.
Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to the Suffolk Pod Show. Find us on Facebook, Twitter or Instagram, or you can visit our website, podtalk.co.uk. And here's our disclaimer.
The Suffolk Pod Show will not be held responsible for any omissions or errors in its podcast.
The Suffolk Pod Show is produced purely for entertainment purposes. Views and opinions are that of our own or that of our guests.